Thank you for joining us. This is the inaugural presentation for the series We Were There. This series was designed because public health is about people, not just the people we serve, but also the people who have served. This is an opportunity for them to share their experiences, their rich, detailed stories, and their insights, so that we may be inspired to carry on their work. And at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Ann Schuckett to the podium for a few words.
Thanks so much, Phoebe, and welcome everybody. It's just awesome to look out here and see the crowd. It's really, I think we're just all very excited about this series and about launching it today. I am really excited to get to welcome you to the first installment of the We Were There series. And if you're like me, the extraordinary richness of CDC's history is one of the reasons that you came to work at CDC. I've always been energized by the idea that what we do makes a difference for people and that is part of our incredible history and also part of our future. There's some moments in CDC's history that are just a bit larger in the public's awareness than others. Of course, today we say the Zika response and recently the Ebola response are among those moments. But the We Were There series is meant to bring back some of these exceptional periods and give today's workforce a chance to hear directly from those who came before. So how can you begin a series like this at an institution like CDC? As you can imagine, choosing among the seminal moments in CDC's past is virtually impossible. We did have some write-ins about our choice, so there was not unanimity in this. But there's two reasons I can admit to why we wanted to begin with AIDS. On paper, I can say that we're launching the series on essentially the 35th anniversary of the first Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report about what later became known as AIDS. But in reality, you can think of this as similar to taking the moderator's prerogative to ask the first question. The series is organized by our Office of the Associate Director of Science, and our very own Associate Director for Science, Harold Jaffe, was a central character in the early days of AIDS, not just the movie, but the real-life version. So many at CDC and elsewhere were part of that story. I believe so many of you as well, and that story's continuation occurs today. Before we get into the formal program, I think it can be tempting to consider this early period with nostalgia, but the early days of AIDS in America were pretty horrible. I was doing my residency training in New York City in the mid-1980s when about a third of the patients on the wards was literally dying from AIDS. In those days, the first diagnosis was often the beginning of the end, and I met so many young men who had been feeling fine a few weeks before and suddenly couldn't breathe without support or developed splotches across their bodies that sometimes spread to internal organs or had a bad headache or change in vision as their first indication that something was terribly wrong. In the clinics, as we administered the temporizing supporting treatments for an array of opportunistic infections, the Bactrim and amphotericin that were pretty much all we had to offer at that time, our patients started to break the news of their shocking diagnoses to their loved ones. Like we saw recently with Ebola, there was fear, stigma, discrimination, and massive confusion. In the first years of AIDS, the CDC was making sense of this mysterious new disease, churning out data and recommendations in the days before the internet, using shoe leather epidemiology, and meeting the communities where they lived. We are so lucky today to get to hear directly from some of our agents' heroes who were there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schuckett. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Harold Jaffe and Dr. Jim Curran.
Well, thank you, Phoebe, for that kind introduction. It's really a great honor to be the kickoff session for this new We Were There series, and it's a particular pleasure to be able to be participating with Jim Curran, Martha Rogers and Walt Dowdle, all of whom played really important roles in the early epidemic, which they'll talk about in a bit. I know many of you were not born when these events took place, or certainly weren't reading the newspapers at the time. But it's important, I think, and Anne alluded to this, to understand what a truly terrible disease this was, particularly in the pre-treatment era. I think this story also illustrates the power of epidemiology and how we can understand a new disease and even prevent it before we know the cause. And finally, in keeping with the theme for this lecture series, we were actually there. CDC played a critical role in understanding and responding to the early AIDS epidemic. Today's presentation is going to include both a lecture and clips from the film and the band played on. This film was released by Home Box Office in 1993, and it's based on a book of the same name, published in 1987. The author, Randy Shilts, is shown here. Randy Shilts was an openly gay newspaper reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle and very sadly died of the disease. The film uses actors, I think some of whom you'll recognize, playing the parts of people who were actually involved. So here are some of those main characters in the film clips. Of course, many more people, including a number of CDC staff, were involved in the early work. And you'll notice, if you know any of these people in real life, that their roles are a bit distorted, presumably for a dramatic purpose. My character is there for comic relief, which is probably appropriate. The film starts with a scene from the medical intensive care unit at UCLA Hospital in the fall of 1980. This means a lot to me because I actually trained in medicine at UCLA and left just 6 years before these events were being depicted. So let me show you the first clip.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
You know,
Doctor?
No.
here we are. This is...
When is his T-cell pill?
Well, I gotta tell you, Dr. Gottlieb, this is weird, man.
What?
He doesn't have any.
How can he not have any T-cells?
Well, his immune system's gone.
It's way past his bedtime. But let me...
Morning. Good morning, Dr. Guinan. Jim,
Yeah.
can I talk to you for a minute? I just got this in the mail from our man in L.A., Dr. Shindera, who got it from a Dr. Gottlieb. I think you ought to look at it right away. Jim, looks like there's a very weird epidemic breaking out among gay men in Los Angeles. There have been 5 cases of pneumocystis with no contributing disease within the past few months, and already 2 fatalities.
Hot stuff.
Plus, I made some phone calls to New York and San Francisco, and it seems that they've had similar cases. I think this ought to go into the weekly newsletter as soon as possible. What did you do that for?
I don't decide what goes in the newsletter. I can only recommend. But, Mary, we got a new administration. Do you want to see this published so that people can read it? Or do you want to see it killed?
Thanks.
Almost exactly 35 years ago on June 5th, 1981. I think you actually have copies of it with you, but it didn't even make the cover of the MMWR. As was mentioned in the film, the article described 5 young, previously healthy homosexual men who had all developed biopsy-proven pneumocystis pneumonia at 3 hospitals in Los Angeles. 2 of these men had already died. These cases seem to be very unusual in several respects. First of all, we think of pneumocystis as a disease that occurs in immunosuppressed persons, somebody who, say, has gotten cancer chemotherapy or an organ transplant, but these individuals didn't have any of these risk factors. And yet they developed this unusual infection. Secondly, why were they all homosexual men? And thirdly, why were they being seen in Los Angeles and possibly in New York and San Francisco? So I want to ask Jim, since he was there, what he was thinking when we got these reports.
CDC was alerted to this because of a recently deceased clerk named Sandy Ford, who retired from CDC, And Sandy had noticed requests for pentamidine isothianate coming from people who had no reason to have pneumocystis pneumonia, and alerted her supervisors in the Parasitic Disease Division. So the investigation began at CDC from a very attentive clerk who called attention to it. I think when we saw this, Harold and I and others were working with the hepatitis folks on hepatitis B vaccine trials in gay men, and we were very, very attuned to the epidemiology of hepatitis B in that community and to the ongoing explosion of STDs in the late 70s. So we went into this with a very strong thought that this was something that was sexually transmitted, and also that would meet it a hill upward climb to get people to pay attention to it.
Well, the following month, the mystery that started in June became even more mysterious. So let me show you the next clip.
Okay, what we've got in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York is a number of gay men who've been hit with a variety of opportunistic infections, and really that's all we know. I've asked Don to join us because for the last 3 years he's been tracking hepatitis B virus in gay men, and before that worked on the Ebola fever epidemic in Africa. Yeah, thanks for joining us. What we've got to do is hit the phones and spread out, contact the health departments in all the major metropolitan areas as usual, so they can do a hospital-to-hospital search for cases.
Basic shoe leather epidemiology.
That's it. We've got to talk to the patients, talk to the doctors who may have treated those patients, and friends, relatives. No question too stupid or too personal.
Sexual relationships, too.
Lifestyle stuff. Household chemical cleaning, diet,
Could be a bad batch of street drugs.
pets.
Yeah, maybe they all get the same kind of kitty litter.
Don, I'm going to go to New York this afternoon and take a look at this disease. Can you come with me?
Sure.
If I knew these blotches would turn purple, I'd have bought some bags to match. Here, look at my book. When I was still human. I was the best in the business. Ask anybody. Leave it to me to get some disease nobody ever heard of. Kaposi, sarcoma. Even my doctor had to look it up. Nothing to worry about, he said. Usually happens to Italian men in their 60s who continue to live a normal life till they die of something else. Do I look like an Italian man in my 60s? Now I do. 160. Why do they make things like this that nobody can ever solve?
So this is now just a month later. This is early July 1981. And we've heard about additional gay men with opportunistic infections, but also with this malignancy mentioned in the film, Kaposi sarcoma. And up until this time, Kaposi sarcoma, or KS, was a rare disease in the United States. It had been described in 1872 by a dermatologist, Moritz Kaposi. And the disease that he described was a disease that occurred primarily in elderly men, particularly those of Ashkenazi Jewish or Southern European ancestry. And it was a rare disease. Cancer registry data from the mid-1970s indicated there were only 300 or 400 cases reported each year in the United States. And this is an example of the classical form of the disease. It typically occurs in the lower extremity, usually of elderly men. I think I saw one case in medical school that looked exactly like this, kind of a plaque-like lesion. And this form of the disease progressed very slowly. So typically, individuals might be treated with radiation or sometimes not treated at all. And the dogma at the time was that an elderly man would much more likely die with Kaposi sarcoma rather than from Kaposi sarcoma. Now, this is what we were seeing in these young gay men. Histologically, if you did a biopsy, it's indistinguishable from what I just showed you on the older man. But clinically, it was much different. It was much more aggressive. So you might see a patient in clinic 1 week, and he would have 2 or 3 of these lesions. A few weeks later, might have half a dozen, and a few weeks later might look like this slide. And the disease wasn't just limited to the skin. Here's an example of a patient who has an oral lesion. These same lesions could occur elsewhere in the GI tract, in the stomach, in the lung, and they were very vascular. They could bleed, so patients actually were dying of this, which was really unheard of. The most interesting thing that we discovered in reading more about this was that there are a number of case reports where when this disease developed in the immunosuppressed individual, particularly in renal transplant recipients, sometimes when it was possible to reduce the level of immunosuppression or even stop it, the disease would regress. So there seemed to be some relationship between the level of immune function and the occurrence of Kaposi sarcoma, but at the time, we had no idea what it was about. Now, up until this time, this is early in the summer of 1981, we were just relying on physicians calling us and saying, you know, I saw one of those. I saw a young gay man and he had this and that, and we dutifully recorded it. But it became pretty obvious that that wasn't going to be a real surveillance system or a way to track the epidemic. And as you all know, the first thing you have to have is a case definition. So we made one up. Our EIS officer, Harry Haverkos, came up with this and said that what we're interested in is biopsy-proven Kaposi sarcoma, or one of a list of about a dozen life-threatening opportunistic infections, things like cerebral toxoplasmosis or cryptococcal meningitis. They had to be a previously healthy person under age 60 because we weren't interested in KS of the elderly. And obviously we excluded individuals who had some known cause of immunodeficiency. You'll notice that at the time the disease didn't have the name AIDS. It didn't have any name actually. So we called it KSOI for Kaposi sarcoma and opportunistic infection. We were then able to ask field EIS officers to contact infectious disease specialists, oncologists, dermatologists, and major teaching hospitals to report if they saw anyone meeting this case definition to their state and local health departments, and then to us at CDC. So this is a copy of our phone report form. It had patients' names on it, but you'll be reassured that they were ultimately deleted. And using this case report form, it was possible to draw an epidemic curve. This curve was actually driven by my wife, Mary Chamberlain, when she was an EIS officer working for David Sensor in New York. This is obviously from the pre-PowerPoint era. It shows you the case totals nationally with the crosshatch areas from New York City. So Jim, is there anything you want to say about the case definition and establishing a surveillance system?
I think one of the most important decisions we made was to have a very specific case definition. We knew that it was insensitive because there were many less dramatic cases occurring in gay men. We didn't want to define the disease by who it was first reported in. And pneumocystis pneumonia at the time could only be diagnosed by open lung biopsy. So by the time somebody would get one of those, they were really sick. And the specificity of the case definition allowed us to track very carefully the epidemiologic patterns, which ultimately helped to define a means for prevention before the cause was discovered.
Well, let's move on now to a bit later in the summer of 1981.
Do you have many gay friends, Harold?
Not too many, no. 2 doctors I knew at medical school. I still stay in touch with them.
Are they a couple?
Yeah, actually, 15 years at least.
Kiko and I, Kiko's my lover, we've got a wide circle of friends, and most of them are in relationships, or want to be in a relationship.
So what are you saying?
Lots of men go to these bathhouses, but there are tens of thousands of gay men in this city, maybe a couple of 100,000. You know, they're just cops and waiters and teachers and lawyers and ditch diggers and athletes.
Bill, talk a little louder. They can't hear you down the block.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to lecture. I just don't want you to come away from your tour of the bathhouses thinking that's how all gay men live.
Last night, we lost another one. In less than 3 weeks, this handsome young guy turns into the Elephant Man, which we found out was caused by some rare parasite that only sheep get. So I called a vet to ask what they do when sheep get it. They shoot them.
Good luck. Thanks.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Selma Dritz, Department of Public Health. We're here to inspect the premises.
I'll see if I can find the boss.
Thanks.
Those 2 guys there, they're strangers?
Maybe. Probably.
They just met, and now they're going to go in the...
Right.
It's interesting.
Listen to me. Imagine yourself in a place like this. Only it's filled with women. I mean, really beautiful women. I mean, imagine one of those penthouse women, and she must have gone into that little room with you, and there's nothing between you but a little towel. Are you going to tell me that you wouldn't go into that little room, seriously consider dropping that little towel?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. I know men who would give up food for it. Hi, Eddie. How are you? Good. Eddie Papazano, Dr. Harold Jaffe from the Centers for Disease Control.
Hi. So what's the problem? Well, there may be some kind of an epidemic spreading in the gay community, and I'd like to just come in and have a look around.
I'm sorry, that's impossible. We have to protect the confidentiality of our clients.
I know, but Eddie, you know that I speak on behalf of the Gay Liberation Committee, the City Council, the State Assembly. I can tell you without fear of contradiction, you are regarded, second only to Abeling, as a citizen who would fight to the death to preserve civil liberties. So let's cut the crap. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, for God's sake. Let us in.
Selma, only for you.
Thank you. You're a real mensch, Eddie.
So how many men come here a night?
Hundreds. Every night of the week. Some bathhouses more than 1,000.
What's this?
Poppers. They're a quick, cheap high.
You probably recognize some of the actors in that clip, Lily Tomlin and Phil Collins and Sir Ian McKellen. The actor who played me is a person named Charles Martin Smith, who's best known for eating mice in Never Cry Wolf and playing Terry the Toad in American Graffiti. So obviously somebody knew a lot about me before they cast this. The scene is shown in a bathhouse in San Francisco, but it's actually based on a visit that Bill Darrow, one of our research sociologists, and I made to the club baths here in Atlanta. And we were particularly interested in learning more about poppers, nitrite inhalants. So we showed up wearing our government blue blazers. We were the only ones wearing clothes, so we were fairly obvious. And we sat at a little card table and said, "Excuse me, can I talk to you?" And the men were actually incredibly cooperative. They were happy to talk about what they were doing, and particularly about these inhalants. These inhalants actually could be bought in the bathhouse in these bottles with names on them, like Locker Room, which is very appropriate because these things smell like sweat socks. But they could also be bought in these more mysterious-looking brown bottles in gay bookstores and bars. And they were being used to enhance gay sex. So we thought, well, what's in this stuff? Is it possible as a contaminant that's causing immunodeficiency? So we bought some. I don't know how we put it on our government credit cards. We brought them back to CDC. The environmental health laboratories analyzed them and just found what we thought they had in them, which was butyl, isobutyl, and amyl nitrite, no obvious contaminant. They were also used to expose the laboratory animals, I think rats, in an inhalation chamber to see if they were immunosuppressive, and they were not. So we thought, well, we can't say for sure that these don't play a role, but at least it's not obvious. So Jim, what did you make of the environmental hypothesis? Did you think there was anything to it, or do you think from the beginning that it was an infection?
Well, I explained our bias to begin with because it looked so much like a sexually transmitted pathogen, but we didn't want to lose any opportunity to just end it. I mean, what if it were due to something that was an environmental contaminant that could simply be eliminated from the environment and the epidemic would end? At CDC, we were used to the ends of epidemics, beginning with the curve that comes down, and that's what we all hope for. We had a lot of help from NIOSH and other people. We actually did inhalant studies of the immune systems of mice and a variety of different things that were singularly unconvincing. In terms of how we bought things, we lived in an era where we pleaded ignorance and asked forgiveness more than we got permission.
Let's move on to now early autumn in 1981.
All right, what do we think? What do we know? What can we prove?
Zip.
Only gays?
Think, but can't prove.
Only males?
Think, but can't prove.
Semen depositors. If it's in the semen, unless there's something specifically unusual about this disease, it shouldn't make a difference where the semen is deposited, whether in the anus or in the vagina, which could mean that women will be getting it also.
That's a good point. You should focus on that.
All we know so far is that the immune system stops functioning completely.
In all cases?
No, but can't prove.
You know, what we have here looks more like a sexually transmitted disease than syphilis does.
Think or prove?
Well, I can't prove that the sun isn't going to turn into a bran muffin next Tuesday. After 20 years of doing this, I know what I know.
That's not what I'm trying to do.
Don't say I know it's pure supposition, but it's more than strong enough to justify a definitive study.
I agree with Bill. It's a single infectious agent with a high probability of sexual transmission.
Well, then viral or bacterial?
Well, if you skip think and prove, I'd say viral, but it's only a guess.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, well, let's assume that it is a virus. Now, the question is it one that we already know that has become lethal, or is this some kind of brand new virus that we've never even seen before?
Here's a little stat to chew on. In 7 months, the number of cases jumped from 5 to 152 in 15 states.
7 months?
Yeah, but the spooky part is that so far the mortality rate has been 40%.
40%.
And according to the doctors taking care of these patients, the mortality rate could ultimately turn out to be 100%.
100%.
My God.
All right, let's set up a case control study based on the premise that it's sexually transmitted.
So we did set up that case control study. It was pretty obvious how to get the cases. We would go to the cities with the largest number of reported cases of either gay men with pneumocystis pneumonia and or Kaposi sarcoma or an opportunistic infection. We would interview them in person, but it wasn't so obvious how we would get controls. We went around in a circle about, do we want men and women, just straight men and gay men, or only gay men? We finally decided just to limit the control group to apparently healthy gay men. But the next question was, how would you find suitable matched controls, matched to the cases within about 5 years of age, by race and city of residence? One idea we had was, let's ask the cases for the names of their male friends who are not their sex partners. And actually less than half of them could do that, so that was probably a clue. We were able to make contact with a number of physician providers, mainly gay men, who had predominantly gay male practices, and said, could you help us recruit from your practice, which they did. And finally, we went to public STD clinics in these cities that served large numbers of gay men. Now, there's an obvious bias. That is, if you're being seen in an STD clinic, you're probably pretty sexually active. We knew that, but we figured, well, we'll just have to take that into account when we look at the study. This was the face sheet that we used for our case control study in early autumn of 1981.
Stick around here. I might be coming right out. Dr. Mary, guy name, please.
Your name? I'm a friend of Dr. Conant.
Your name?
You can tell him. He has no idea who you are, and we'll pretend we never heard of you.
You guys ahead of me?
You can go ahead. We've got nothing to do except go to a Halloween party. During rehearsal, I know. It's très gauche to fawn, but I happen to think you're a genius. I mean, a double genius as a director and a choreographer.
Is it you?
Bobby Campbell, self-appointed KS poster boy. You look surprised.
No. Curious, maybe.
Well, you know, if the gay community doesn't start raising hell, do you think Reagan's gonna do a damn thing?
I wish I had your courage.
Courage? No. I'm scared to death. I just have this absurd determination to live. Don't you?
It's open.
Dr. Guinan?
Yes.
I tell you, I expected the neighborhood, the hotel, this room even, but I think it would take Fellini to cast such a beautiful young woman in a sweatsuit as the doctor I'm supposed to reveal my most intimate sexual eccentricities to.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Mary Guinan, and the reason for this wetsuit is somebody stole every piece of clothing I brought with me from the laundromat this morning. Would you mind signing these two consent forms? One is for the questionnaire, and one is for the specimens I need to collect.
Which specimens?
Blood, urine, a swab from the inside of your mouth, and another from your rectum. In this study, some have the disease, and some, like you, have no symptoms.
You know, I really don't mind if you know all this about me. I'm just not too sure that I want to know. Is there a name yet for this disease?
The gay press calls it gay pneumonia or gay cancer, and the straight press doesn't mention it at all.
You know, it's hung up in traffic coming over here. Gay Halloween parade was on. Have you seen it?
I didn't know they had one.
Yeah, they do. It's really pretty amazing. Party's over.
I want to know why Richard Gere didn't play me. But it's something I've come to live with. We didn't interview Richard Gere, but the rest of the scene is pretty realistic. We did interview men in the hotel rooms in the cities where we were working. I think our per diem was about $25 a night, so we were not staying at the Four Seasons. And the desk clerks were puzzled why all these young men were coming asking to talk to the CDC doctors. You can imagine how uncomfortable this would have been for everybody involved, but actually within a few minutes, we found that the men we were talking to were extremely open. I think the main reason for this was fear. Patients who had the disease knew they had it. They knew that they weren't going to do very well. Even the controls often knew other men who had the disease, and there was a genuine desire to try to help us figure out what was going on. Now, Jim, you did a lot of interviewing in New York, and I wonder what your impression was of the men that you talked to.
I think the context I'd like to start with is that how deep the closet was for the gay community in those days. Not only was there not gay marriage, but being a federal employee and being openly gay was not the greatest thing. And we had an employee who helped us who was a public health advisor in New York City who was openly gay while he was in New York City, but not after he moved to Atlanta. And he, unfortunately, himself died of AIDS about 10 years ago after the good drugs were available because he kept it secret. So this is still a problem in the world, and it was a real problem in '81. The gay community and the health departments in New York City were extremely helpful, and I think that we had all sorts of cooperation from a community that was aware of this. The gay press also were very helpful and also informative. And the mainstream press and TV simply stayed away from AIDS for at least a year and a half.
Thanks. The next few slides come from the case control study. First of all, you can see that we were able to interview 50 men in person in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and a couple from Atlanta. About 3/4 of them were white, which fit the demographic profile of the early epidemic. And here are some of the variables, again, looking at 50 cases, 78 clinic controls. These are public STD clinics, and 42 patients from private medical practices. You can see that the case patients were more likely to have had gonorrhea and syphilis than either control group. They were more likely to use different kinds of street drugs, and the use of the poppers, the nitrite inhalants, was essentially universal. In looking in more detail at sexual activity, we saw some really big differences. So for example, the median number of sex partners per year for the cases was more than twice as many for either control group. And again, one of those control groups is coming from public STD clinics. The median proportion of partners from bathhouses was much higher, and the age at initiating gay sex was a little bit younger in the cases than controls. When we finally managed to publish the study, I think we were fairly cautious in our conclusions. We said that we thought the occurrence of these diseases in the gay men that we were studying was associated with certain aspects of their lifestyle. And we went on to say that the biggest differences seemed to relate to sexual activity, but because drug use was so intertwined with sexual activity, men having a lot of sex were using a lot of drugs, we couldn't say for sure that we were dealing with a sexually transmitted disease, although I think that's what we thought. I thought you'd be interested in seeing how this study was covered by the mainstream media by looking at a broadcast from NBC Nightly News. It's interesting also, you'll see the real Bobby Campbell, the real Jim Curran, 35 years ago, who looks surprisingly like the current Jim Curran. And I think they're the same person. And you'll get a clue about the next part of the investigation.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in Atlanta.
Bobby Campbell of San Francisco and Billy Walker of New York both suffer from a mysterious, newly discovered disease which affects mostly homosexual men, but has also been found in heterosexual men and women. The condition severely weakens the body's ability to fight disease. Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia. Researchers know of 413 people who have contracted the condition in the past year. 1/3 have died and none have been cured.
Death didn't scare me. It was living with this for a long time. That's more frightening than death.
Investigators have examined the habits of homosexuals for clues.
I was in the fast lane at one time in terms of the way that I lived my life, and now I'm not.
The best guess is that some infectious agent is causing it. Today, researchers here at the National Centers for Disease Control said they had found several cases where people who had been sex partners both had the condition. The scientists say this probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease. The investigators see this as a serious public health problem.
From an epidemic point of view, there have been more deaths from Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia than have occurred with all the cases of toxic shock syndrome and the Philadelphia outbreak of Legionnaire's disease combined.
Researchers are now studying blood and other samples from the victims, trying to learn what is causing the disease. So far, they have had no luck. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Atlanta.
Jim, other than your youthful appearance, do you have any comments about that clip?
Well, one of the things that helped us was the handsome Bob Bazell had gone to college at Berkeley with Harold Jaffe and had an inside track to get this on TV. It was a real battle to get any public attention to AIDS, both from the Reagan administration, but particularly also from the press.
It's interesting, Jim, also that you brought up Legionnaire's disease, which will be the next topic for the We Were There series. So as mentioned in the newscast, we'd heard from our EIS officer in Los Angeles, Dave Auerbach, that based on conversations he'd had with the gay community, that some of the early cases had been sex partners of each other. And he wanted to interview them to find out if that was correct, but had never done this kind of work before. So we were able to send out Bill Darrow, our research sociologist, who'd formerly been an STD investigator, to help him out. And the answer to the question about sexual contacts being cases came just within a few days later.
It's not a problem. I really...
Jim, I got a call from L.A.
Wait a minute, I'm on the phone. I can get you this.
I got a call from L.A. This could be the first real lead to prove this thing is sexually transmitted. My plane leaves in 40 minutes.
Hold on. We don't have the budget yet approved.
No, don't sweat it. I'll front the money.
Yeah.
You'll pay me back.
Okay, well, if you think you have definitive proof it was brought in by a UFO, please send it in to us. Thank you.
You don't know a man from New York with a French-Canadian accent, do you? Very handsome, also very chic.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I very seldom. Wait a minute. This might help somebody else, right?
Right.
Of course I know him. From the bathhouses. Now, I never had sex with him, but almost everybody I know has or wants to.
I'm so fond of him. Then again, he gave me hepatitis, so it's quite possible to give me this, too. From the moment I first spied him at the Tubs, I was so crazy about him. He was so gorgeous.
Can you just give me his phone number or address or any way I can get a hold of him?
All I know is he's French-Canadian, he's an airline steward, based in New York. I don't even know which airline.
Oh, that's okay. If you can just give me his name.
We called him Dougie. Nickname.
Dougie. And his full name. Hi, Mary.
Hi. You back in town?
Just for the night. I'm probably nuts, but I'm on my way to New York to try and find a very sexually active French-Canadian airline steward.
Gaetan Dugas? Bill Darrow.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Sit down. Take all the time you need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming in.
Ah, well, I'm very flattered to be asked. Although I have no idea what I'm here to discuss. Would it disturb you if I smoke?
If you need to, go ahead. Mr. Degas, have you had sex with any of these people?
Is that what I'm here for? To talk about my beautiful lovers? And now I am flattered. Although, if you don't mind my saying, I cannot possibly imagine why you'd be interested.
We've been finding substantial evidence to suggest that one of the ways this disease may be transmitted is sexually.
Now, wait a minute. Look, all I have is skin cancer, which is not contagious, and you know it.
No one's accusing you of anything. We just need to know as much as we can.
You know, I adore doctors, but I must say, if it is an epidemic, this gay plague thing, it's your fault for not stopping it. It's not mine.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. And we need everybody's help. So if you could give me the names and addresses of all your lovers and start with the people on this list, please.
My friend, we're talking about thousands of men all over the world whose faces I cannot even remember, and you want names.
Well, as many as you can remember would help.
My book's in my apartment. You call me, huh?
What's the number?
I'll call you.
Listen, help me, don't help me. That's up to you. But don't fuck with me. I'm not playing games here.
Not before 6, and not after 6:30.
Thank you.
And remember something. Whatever it is, if I've got it, someone gave it to me.
All right, this is how it breaks down. This is patient 0, an airline steward from New York, and the starting point of this particular group. Now, these are the 8 with whom he had direct sexual contact. These 4 in New York, these 4 in L.A. This is L.A. 3. He had sex with L.A. 2, this man from Florida, who in turn had sex with this Florida man, 2 from Georgia, 1 from Texas, and so on. In all, 40 cases in 10 cities are verifiably linked to patient 0, which strongly suggests this is a sexually transmitted disease.
That's great. That's absolutely terrific work, Bill. That's great.
Bill, that is the first sign of real proof.
Yep. Good job.
Interview that Bill Darrow gave about this investigation, he said these three men, they'd never met, they'd never had sex, yet they named the same three guys in the same guy in New York City. I actually dropped my pen. David Auerbach's mouth was just hanging open. He practically fell off of his chair. So these are the slides that Bill showed us when he came back from his trip to California. So here's the out of California KS case, who's Mr. Dugas, linking together two clusters of cases in Southern California. And here he's linking together cases in Los Angeles to cases in New York City. And then finally, the slide that you saw in the presentation of a cluster linking together 40 men in 10 different North American cities. Now, because he was referred to as patient zero in a publication, the U.S. media went berserk, and they said, patient zero, he must be the guy who brought the epidemic to the Americas. And we never intended to suggest that, and we had no evidence that that, in fact, was true. In fact, we've done recent phylogenetic studies indicating that there are viruses that were collected in the late 1970s older than Mr. Dugas. But there were certainly men like him, other relatively affluent, highly mobile men who have sex with men, who easily could have spread a sexually transmitted infection throughout the sexually active gay population of the United States. It's interesting to note that besides Mr. Dugas, two of the other members of this clusters were flight attendants. Now, at the time of the investigation, we thought the graph, the figure that we showed you, literally indicated who infected who. It wasn't until much later that we learned the incubation period for the disease was much longer, probably 10 years. So at least some of the men in this cluster had probably been infected some years before. But still, it's important to see this sexual network and how these men could have infected each other. Very unlikely to have been the result of chance alone. So Jim, when you saw Bill Darrow's presentation and the cluster diagram that he showed, were you convinced we were dealing with an STD?
I think that, you know, those of us at CDC were absolutely convinced. But the power of denial is so great in the absence of an agent that it still made people think it couldn't happen. When Dr. Auerbach and Dr. Darrow published their paper in the American Journal of Medicine, they calculated the likelihood of this occurring by chance to be 1 × 10⁻12th if 5% of men in the country were gay. The other thing is that it's very curious how we're able to link these cases together with that long incubation period. And perhaps it was related to the fact that maybe the earliest cases clustered around those with the shortest incubation periods. That's speculative, but that certainly happened with the dentist case later on.
Now, for reasons unknown to me, CDC medical officers did, and many, including me, still do keep their notes in green laboratory notebooks. Maybe it's because they're wannabe laboratory scientists. I don't know. I did that, and here's a copy of a page in my notebook that was dated November 1982. I covered the patient's name, but I've summarized here a call that I received from Dr. Arthur Amon, who is a well-known pediatric immunologist at UC San Francisco, who was asked to consult on a child who was born in March 1981. That baby had Rh disease, a hemolytic anemia, and required multiple exchange transfusions to treat that condition. Following his discharge from the hospital, he was unwell. He developed other opportunistic infections. He required more blood, and it wasn't clear what was going on. Now, Art Amon literally had written a book about pediatric immunodeficiency, and he said, you know, this doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. What it looks like is AIDS, except everybody knows that AIDS doesn't occur in children. The transfused blood all came from one place, Irwin Memorial Blood Center in San Francisco. This last clip, which isn't very factually accurate, but I think is important, shows you the investigation of that child and what ensued.
Harold Jaffe, CDC.
do?
Harold Jaffe.
Betsy Rice.
So it's true, huh?
He was born here 20 months ago, an our-age baby. Within a week, his entire blood volume had been replaced 6 times. Now he has Zostra, practically 0 T-cell count, and more opportunistic disease than we know what to do with.
And he had 13 donors?
All from Irwin Memorial. That's all I could find out. They keep a lid in the place so tight it's like the Pentagon. So forget about getting a list of donors from them.
The first irrefutable case caused by transfusions, and these people are stonewalling us.
Yeah?
You know what we need? Somebody just to scare the hell out of them.
Only Attila the Hun could.
Selma Dritz. Well?
I got it. But there's one problem. Well, 2 problems. I'm freezing. That's one problem. Let's get some coffee. One of the donors died from the disease 2 months ago. We can't prove it.
What do you mean we can't prove it? How can we not prove it?
He was from one of the richest, most socially prominent families in town. And he swore to his dying breath he wasn't gay.
What's the difference what he said? I mean, when somebody dies from this, you can't exactly mistake it for whooping cough.
According to his doctor, he died from encephalitis. It's on his death certificate.
All right, let's talk to the doctor.
And get him to say what? He lied?
Well, somewhere in this town, there's got to be somebody, a gay man he had sex with, or what about his family? Did they know?
My brother wasn't gay. And I can assure you, no matter how hard you search, you're not going to find one shred of evidence to suggest the contrary. He was on the board of several corporations. He was the chairman of the fundraising committee for St. Patrick's. He was meticulous. He was meticulous in concealing his other life, even from me.
Excuse me, I would like to remind everyone, I think they're confusing. I'd like to remind everyone that these are not regulations. These are not regulations from the CDC. This is a workshop where every agency connected to the blood industry can evaluate information that the CDC has found. And together, we are hoping to be able to arrive at some course of action. One option is to establish guidelines to keep people who are at high risk from donating blood to begin with.
Banning homosexuals from giving blood won't protect the blood supply. What it will do is stigmatize them. Reminds me of blood banks rejecting donations from blacks for fear of syphilis.
Have you any idea of the civil rights implications of establishing
Civil rights,
such guidelines?
my ass. My son's a hemophiliac, and if homosexuals are infecting the blood supply, why not keep them from becoming donors?
What do you mean the entire gay community? Then what? Separate drinking fountains? One for gays, one for humans?
Don't start that gay rights crap with me. There are 20,000 hemophiliacs in this country, and GRID has become the second leading cause of death amongst them. We have rights too, and one of them is the right to stay alive.
I know that we're dealing with a very complex and a highly emotional issue, but it would help
I wonder
a lot
how you
if
can
we're all
expect us to be unemotional when at least one person is dying every day from a disease that doesn't even have a name. Now, if the CDC can't bother to come up with a name, at least it should stop the media from calling it GRID. We have enough people hating gays without having the entire stigma of this disease placed on us, especially since it has been shown that this disease is no longer merely gay-related. Now, I make a motion to officially call this disease Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS.
Questions or discussions on this issue, please?
I second it.
All right, all in favor of Dr. Veller's motion? And opposed? The motion's carried. Dr. Beauvais?
The FDA advisory panel to the blood banks feels that the evidence for nearly all of this is inferential. The CDC's evidence of blood transmission cannot be warranted until the CDC shows definitively that an infectious agent causes this disease. Nothing about it even exists in the peer-reviewed medical literature. Not one case. Evidence of such blood transmission is lacking.
May I point out that the blood industry is under the jurisdiction of the FDA, and the FDA, according to Dr. Beauvais, does not acknowledge that there is an epidemic because there is no evidence that it's a blood-borne disease.
Suppose, for example, a small amount of blood, by some unlikely chance, is contaminated. With no test to find out which blood is safe and which isn't, what do you suggest we do? Destroy the entire blood supply in America because some of it may or may not be contaminated?
No. Well, in fact, testing is the second option that we should discuss. Now, we at the CDC have found that the hepatitis B test is 88% effective in identifying patients with this disease.
Is the CDC seriously suggesting that the blood industry spend $100 million a year to use a test for the wrong disease because we've had a handful of transfusion fatalities and 8 dead hemophiliacs?
How many dead hemophiliacs do you need? How many people have to die to make it cost efficient for you people to do something about it? 100? 1,000? Give us a number so we won't annoy you again until the amount of money you begin spending on lawsuits makes it more profitable for you to save people than to kill them.
The disease called AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, sounds less than deadly, more like a diet pill.
Medical researchers are warning the risk of contracting the disease AIDS.
Henry Pena, who has AIDS, got into a minor traffic accident, so police called the hazardous materials team.
The impact on blood banks could be disastrous.
This clip isn't very accurate. GRID, which refers to gay-related immune deficiency, was a term we never used at CDC. And AIDS wasn't named at this meeting. Also, Art Ahman was morphed into a woman played by Angelica Houston. Jim, you didn't look very happy at the end of the meeting. I'm wondering what you were thinking.
I don't look too happy in the movie. But I would say that the general consternation and the general problems we had getting the blood bankers to cooperate with us was real. So, I mean, they deserve the criticism that they get in this movie. And the term AIDS was suggested, we suggested that Dr. Armstrong suggest to a Public Health Service committee that was subsequent to this meeting that it be called AIDS because we wanted a term ourselves to do this. And we frankly did want something that was memorable, and I guess it is. The one thing I would want to say that's really wrong was that there was not resistance from the gay community at these blood banking meetings. We worked with the gay community leaders that were invited to meetings very strongly and advised them not to do that. And that really is one fiction that came up in this movie that really, I think, makes the gay community look bad. They were very strongly in favor of initially working to eliminate this epidemic.
I guess the question is why the blood bankers and the National Hemophilia Foundation were so negative about what we were presenting. And I think the cause was denial. Is Jeff Copeland here? I didn't see him. But Jeff Copeland chaired this meeting and went on to become a CDC director. And at the meeting, he was quoted by Randy Shilts as saying, "To bury our heads in the sand and say, let's wait for more cases, is not an adequate public health response." I think the blood bankers and the hemophilia treatment providers simply didn't want to face the reality that what they were doing, which they believed to be life-saving, was also putting lives at risk. Fortunately, private discussions that took place over the next few months were more productive. And on March 4th, 1983, the U.S. Public Health Service published the first recommendations for preventing a disease that now actually was known as AIDS. So they said, first of all, people at increased risk are those who have signs and symptoms, the sex partners of people with AIDS, sexually active gay and bisexual men with multiple partners, Haitian entrance to the United States. Now, this was a very controversial point. What we knew was that the disease was occurring in Haiti, and it was occurring in Haitians living in this country, particularly in South Florida and around New York City, but we didn't know why. We actually did a case control study to try to figure out the risk factors, and we came up with nothing. So we said, at least for the time being, that Haitians should not be allowed to donate blood. Now, this undoubtedly caused a lot of unwarranted discrimination in the Haitian community, but I think as a public health decision probably was the right one at the time. We also knew about cases in IV drug abusers. We didn't want them to donate blood either. And then the recommendations were essentially to avoid having sex with somebody known or suspected to have the disease, that having multiple partners increased the risk. And here it says as a temporary measure, persons at increased risk should refrain from donating blood and plasma. Now, as time went on and we had good screening tests for donated blood, gradually these restrictions were eased with one exception, and that is of gay men. It wasn't until early, I guess late last year, that the FDA changed their exclusion recommendations and said gay men can donate blood unless they've had a male partner within the last 12 months. But delays in implementing blood screening and restrictions of donors were very costly. There were a number of lawsuits brought against the blood banking industry and hemophilia manufacturers. In other countries such as France, the officials who were judged responsible for these decisions served jail terms. But on a more positive note, if you can have a more positive note, I think it's remarkable that these guidelines were essentially correct, and they were all done without knowing the cause. It wasn't until a few months later that Luc Montagnier and his colleagues in Paris reported detecting a novel retrovirus in the lymph node of a homosexual man, for which they received the 2008 Nobel Prize. And it was another year before Robert Gallo and his associates at the NCI really showed this virus was the cause of AIDS. So I think these early investigations done by CDC and others really are examples of the power of epidemiology in relatively simple studies to understand a new disease, even make sensible recommendations without knowing the cause. Now, I wish I could tell you that the story ended in 1983, but you know it didn't. So let me quickly bring you up to date. So these dot maps show you how the disease progressed across the United States. Each dot is 30 persons reported with AIDS. The first 10,000 cases in May of 1985, mainly in New York and California. This is the situation in July of 1989. 100,000 cases, lots of cases in places like Puerto Rico, Dallas, Chicago, Seattle, Atlanta. And then finally, the first 500,000 cases. And really at this point, which is now 1995, really every major metropolitan area in the United States had large numbers of cases. And then to bring you up to date, these are the cumulative cases in the United States as reported by CDC. So through 1984, there were about 1.2 million Americans reported with AIDS, of whom more than half had died. And each year we believe that about 40,000 persons are diagnosed with HIV. None of us, certainly not me, predicted that this was part of a global epidemic that was spreading without our knowledge, and that by 2004, about 40 million Americans had already, 40 million people around the world had already died of AIDS, and another almost 40 million were infected with HIV. Now, these numbers, I think, are important, but they obviously don't give you the whole story. They don't give you the human face that Ann was talking about earlier on. So I want to show you the last clip of the film that I think does that, portraying both individuals who had AIDS and advocates for those individuals. I know who most of them are, but not all of them. I'll tell you the ones I do know.
Yesterday, you came to lift me up, as light as straw and brittle as a bird. Today, I weigh less than a shadow on the wall, just one more whisper of a voice unheard. Tomorrow, leave the windows open as fear grows. Please hold me in your arms. Won't you help me if you can to shake this anger? I need your gentle hands to keep me calm.
Ciao, Rudolf Nureyev. Arthur Ashe,
This fire beneath my skin, I can't believe you love
Liberace,
me. I never thought you'd come.
Freddie Mercury,
I guess I misjudged love. Between a father
Princess Diana was an advocate particularly for children with AIDS, as was Elizabeth Taylor.
things we never said.
Elizabeth Glaser,
Together, the hidden truth
Magic
no
Johnson,
longer haunting me. Tonight,
Larry Kramer,
we touched on things that were never
Arthur Ashe
spoken.
again.
That kind of understanding sets me
Halston,
free. 'Cause I never thought I'd lose.
Harry Ellis,
I only thought I'd win.
Peter Allen,
I never dreamed I'd feel this fire beneath my skin. I can't
Keith
believe
Haring,
you love me. I never thought you'd come.
Denham Elliott,
I guess I misjudged love.
Brad Davis, Amanda Blake,
Between a father and his son.
Robert Reed,
Things we never said come together. The hidden truth no longer haunting me. Tonight we touched on
Ryan White
things
again.
that were never spoken. That kind of understanding sets me free. 'Cause I never thought I'd lose. I only thought I'd win. I never dreamed I'd feel this fire beneath my skin. I can't believe you love me. I never thought you'd come.
so Dr.
I
Tom
guess I
Waddle,
misjudged love between a father and his son.
thank you. I'd like to ask Walt Dowdle and Martha Rogers to join us up here for some brief comments and then a couple questions. Martha, I wonder if you can tell us what you were doing in those first few years in the AIDS program and kind of how the epidemic struck you during those early years.
I came to be an EIS officer in 1981 in July, just after that first MMWR came out. And I think one of the reasons that I even decided to come to CDC and go into EIS was this whole notion of discovering new pathogens, new things that cause diseases. And to be a part of something like that, to me, would be very meaningful. I was, I think, Harold and Jim can correct me, but the only pediatric trained, or one of a few pediatric trained people involved. And so naturally, when the children started getting HIV, I had to step up and work on that piece. And that pretty much defined my whole career at CDC, is working with the mother-child transmission and defining all of that and proving that it could be transmitted from mother to child, how often, et cetera. So that was part of my major role.
And Walt Dowdle?
Thank you very much, Harold. And again, once again, I enjoyed this presentation very much. But as to what I did during the AIDS epidemic, I must say that I probably had the most difficult job at CDC during that time, and because I had to keep up with all of these people. And some, not only the people on this table, but also many out in the audience. And it was a very mixed emotions that during this whole time. It was just not possible, even with this film and with Harold's retelling and Jim's retelling, to actually recapture the whole period, particularly the early days of HIV. And I think that one thing that we have to keep reminding ourselves as employees of CDC and past employees of CDC, that public health is politics. There is no question about it. We have to keep that in mind, that public health is politics. That's as it should be. It's politics because it's our responsibility in public health to actually determine the problems and to propose the options and for solutions. And then it's up to the public. It's up to the legislature. It's up to Congress. It's up to the administration then to decide how much you're willing to pay and what options would you take up and support. So it really is an issue of politics. So you look back and say, okay, what could we have done different? Is there any way that we could have simplified the issue? Is there any way we could have moved things faster? Is there any way we could have actually assisted the administration in asking for funds? We could go on and ask these questions, and they were an issue every day. There was lack of funding. The administration refused to fund. And how could we have prevented that, and how could we have come up with better solutions? Fortunately, we had a very sympathetic Congress at the time, but that was very slow in coming. But these were genuine thoughts that people had, different points of view, and it wasn't always going to be resolved just by the telling. And so we have to think back, what could we do differently? What could have been differently? And there are many. I'm sure that Harold, Jim, and Martha could come up with other instances, other examples of what we could have done a little differently, maybe have smoothed things out a little more and actually been a little more acceptable politically. But I think the real important thing that we have to remember is that this will all change. The situations will all change. Ebola will be different from Zika, and so on. So it's not going to be the same thing. Situations will always differ. But one thing will not differ, and it was very clear in the whole HIV, AIDS years, is that CDC has to be seen and must be seen as an organization that it can be depended on. It must be seen as a scientific, accurate organization, and it has to be seen that it's an organization that can be trusted. When you're in the national arena or the international arena, then that one fact is what establishes CDC and overcomes many of the political issues that might be involved. So it's really a major responsibility of all of you out there, and I think all of us in public health, to make certain that that image, that reputation is maintained. And it's really a major responsibility to have. Think of CDC as a brand name. CDC's brand name has to be trusted, and CDC's brand name is an extraordinary asset. And one thing I learned from the whole AIDS epidemic is how valuable that asset is to anything that we do and anything we'll do in the future. So thank you very much.
We have time for some questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Fishman. I'm in the Division of Global Health Protection, and just wanted to thank you very much for this very moving presentation. And just wanted to say many of us, I think, had our path into public health through HIV AIDS. I was 13 in 1981. But when I was 19 in college in New York City, I got involved in ACT UP and started going to ACT UP meetings, and even have my shirt from those days to show for it. I never protested in front of CDC, but I did protest in the big demonstration in front of FDA, and later in my career found myself going into a meeting there, and it's like, I've been here before. Oh my goodness, I was protesting out here, and so my and now I'm here working in CDC.
I thought I recognized you.
Yeah,
You
no,
sure you didn't?
I never protested at CDC. So my question, but it's been very meaningful, and I can trace my entire public health career back to those days. But my question to you is about the role of activists. And I try even now when I see people protesting outside of CDC, and I don't always agree with them, to have compassion for them, because I know that there's a very heartfelt belief that they have. But I wanted to know from your perspective, being on the inside, the role of outsiders and activists, how they influenced you, how it might have been, in some cases, catapulting, but also even how it challenged you.
Thank you for your activism in your career. I would broaden it to start with people living with HIV and AIDS. So I think that more than any other condition up to that time, the people living with HIV played an extremely active role, not only in protesting, but actually in learning about the disease and advising NIH and working with the community. And the people living with AIDS really represented an important part of the solution to the epidemic. And continue to do so. Activists also were courageous and extremely helpful in calling attention to things. And it wasn't always easy for us in government to deal with them because, you know, the White House was not involved for 5 or 6 years, and the only people that could really be approached would be people at CDC or NIH or FDA. I don't know that all of the decisions that were made because of activists were right, but I know that they certainly made a lot of our decisions more transparent, and they really called our attention to the problems that they faced, as well as the attention of the public. So I think that they were extremely beneficial and remain so. And I think the public health community has learned a lot from AIDS activists and people living with HIV and how you want to include people in dealing with this. From my previous career in STDs, I can say that really wasn't true until the AIDS epidemic came along in terms of how people were dealt with syphilis and gonorrhea. They were seen as others to be diagnosed and treated to prevent transmission to yet other others rather than as partners. So I think that I'd like to thank the gay community, thank other people living with AIDS, and the tremendous courage of a lot of these people, like Magic Johnson and Arthur Ashe and many of the people you saw on the screen, because it is about people, and we have to always remember that is why we're doing this.
Well, you probably, or Martha, go ahead.
I think you can't really mention activists without also thinking about people like Elizabeth Glaser, who you saw also in the movie. And her daughter died of AIDS, and she went on then to not just be an activist, but a doer in forming the foundation, which is now responsible for a lot of the decrease in the number of pediatric cases throughout the world. So I would agree with Jim. Activism was extremely important to all of this.
Walt, you probably had some interactions in Washington with the activist community. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that I would agree with what's been said regarding the activists and what a very important role that they played. But we also have to consider that there are many people, particularly in the AIDS epidemic, that actually had very strongly held beliefs that were just the opposite of what the activists were trying to achieve. And I think we have to somehow recognize that how they hold these beliefs and the fact that these beliefs are so different from ours, nevertheless, it's something they sincerely hold. And even when we really talk about the Reagan administration and what awful treatment of the gays and so on and so forth that you hear, nevertheless, this is what they felt. I had the opportunity to be in Washington to set up an AIDS office as an Assistant Secretary of Health's office, and one of my jobs was to go over to the Office of the Science and Technology Policy every few weeks and give a report to them about the status of AIDS. I never actually communicated with them, never actually communicated, because we were talking a different language. And they had one view, we had a totally different view. I mean, a 180-degree view. And as far as they were concerned, this was a lifestyle issue, it was a moral issue, it was not a government issue, and all that the risk groups had to do was stop doing what they were doing and it would all be over. I mean, that was the view. So the real question is, activism is extremely important, but how do we communicate? How do we actually break those barriers and overcome the issues that separate us so much? I sometimes feel like that we don't spend enough time thinking about how do we bridge these gaps and these gulfs that are so important. And we could have done a little better, I think, in the earlier job. But there were a lot of factors that were
Let's take the
influencing.
last question. Can we take one more question?
Hi, Paula Braun, entrepreneur in residence with the National Center for Health Statistics, and Dr. Curran, I also teach at the Rollins School of Public Health. My question for you is, if you had the technology that's available today when this epidemic took hold back in the early 80s, what, if anything, would you do differently?
Technology. Well, you know, there's obviously a lot of issues with social media and a lot of other things. I think that we have a lot different view of homosexuality in politics than we nowadays. So there would have been a lot more internal and open communication about things. I think that, you know, one of the seminal events is the discovery of the virus. And so when I think of technology, the first thing I think of is, could we have discovered the virus sooner? And, of course, we didn't know about the disease till 81, and the virus was discovered in 83. And then could we have developed, you know, I think CDC did a very good job with John Ward and a lot of our laboratory people in standardizing the use of the blood tests, first of all for blood banks, which we're going to use it initially, and demonstrating the critical epidemiologic characteristics and diagnostic characteristics of that test. And we got the test out pretty fast. So the diagnosis of HIV happened fairly quickly after that. Undoubtedly, it would have been several months sooner with today's molecular technologies and things like this. I would say maybe social media and then just the general culture we live in would be the main difference, but others may want to add something.
I wonder if Walt want to comment as a virologist.
I would agree with that. Life would have been indeed a lot simpler had we come up with the virus earlier here at CDC. And in fact, I would predict that had we come up with the virus here at CDC, that there probably would have been no Nobel Prize for discovering the virus, because I don't mean that cynically at all. I'm just saying that's what CDC is supposed to do. It doesn't necessarily deserve a Nobel Prize. It's what we're supposed to do. I keep saying we. I've forgotten. I don't work here any longer. But I always think of it as that's a public service, that we're to actually identify the problem and propose the options, and that would be part of it.
I think, unfortunately, we're out of time. You want to take one quick question?
Yeah, so it's a two-part question. Why 81? Why 1981? Is it because we were more aware of it, or was it something else? And the other one is, so apparently the state of Georgia still has a lot of HIV cases, and I couldn't read the report in detail, but I came across that. What is it that we're still missing? Why is it that we're still not able to protect the at-risk community so well?
For the second part, I suggest you speak with Dr. Merman, who's in the front row. For the first part, I mean, the question in 81 was this actually a new disease, or had it been going on for a long time and we were just missing it? And we looked very hard for cases in earlier years. We found a few in the late 1970s, but very few. So it was one of the very rare instances where we were actually dealing with a new disease, and we can discuss that with you individually if you want. Before we break and before you all have to leave, I want to acknowledge the contribution made by others at CDC. I mean, we're 4 of you, but we're not all of you by a long shot. So could, first of all, the people who worked on the early epidemic maybe stand up and be recognized? And then the persons who are working on it now, could you please stand up? All right, well, I think we'll bring the session to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. and come back on August 31st to learn the real story about Legionnaire's disease.
Thank you very much. Before you leave, could you take a moment, please, to thank our speakers? And also, I'd like to direct you to walk down the steps behind to look at the glass case. The library has put together a showcase of some of the original artifacts from 1981. And also, yes, we will have another one of these in August. Please join us then for Legionnaire's disease. And we'd also like to thank the CDC Foundation for their support. Thank you.